I discovered a hidden side of the school bully. It turns out that every time after a fight, he secretly hides away to cry. My wounds hurt so much. It hurts so bad. Wah wah wah. When I caught him, he quickly wiped away his tears and stubbornly pretended to be fierce. What are you looking at? Look again, and I'll beat you up. The story of how I found the school bully crying started because I was in a rush to get home, and decided to take a shortcut instead of the main road. That day, my mom promised to make sweet and sour ribs for dinner. I was drooling just thinking about it, so I pedaled my bike quickly after school. When I reached the alley, I couldn't resist taking the shortcut. People said this area wasn't safe, with local thugs collecting protection money. But I figured I was just riding a bike, so I shouldn't have anything to worry about. So, I turned the corner and entered the alley. I hadn't gone far before I vaguely heard the sounds of a fight. Curiosity kills the cat, as they say. I, not afraid of anything, parked my bike and walked towards the noise. Unfortunately, I seemed to have arrived too late. By the time I reached the scene, the crowd had already dispersed. Just as I was about to turn back, I suddenly heard a sob. The sound came from deeper within the alley. So, I took a few steps forward. The sky had already started to darken, and the streetlights flickered on. By the trash can sat someone sobbing quietly. My wounds hurt so much. It hurts so bad. Wah wah wah. As I got closer, he heard my footsteps and quickly looked up at me. I froze when our eyes met. Then, my mouth dropped open in surprise. Wasn't this the infamous school bully, Earl Nancy? Why was he crying? Earl Nancy quickly wiped away his tears, putting on a fierce expression. What are you looking at? Keep staring, and I'll beat you up. But I didn't take his threat seriously at all. I even took a step closer and asked curiously, why are you crying? Did you lose the fight? Earl Nancy turned his head away. None of your business. Get lost. I'm thick-skinned. Though, the more he told me to leave, the more I stayed. I made a silly face at him. Neener neener, I'm not going anywhere. Tomorrow, I'll tell everyone at school that I saw the school bully crying in an alley. His tears stopped, and anger flared in his eyes. His fist almost landed on my face. Realizing he wasn't a harmless bunny but a fierce little wolf, I quickly stepped back and hurried toward my bike. Fine. I'm not messing with you anymore. My mom's waiting for me to get home for dinner. Just as I said that, I heard him start sobbing even louder behind me. I turned back and looked at him helplessly. Hey, I didn't even bully you. What are you crying for? He wiped his tears for a while before finally lifting his arm to show me. Sniffling, he said, It really hurts. I looked at the long scratch on his arm and was speechless. Well, you shouldn't have been fighting. Getting hurt is just part of the deal. Still sniffling, he pouted and said, They started it. What did they do to you? They said I'm a kid without a mom. I froze, my tone softening a little. And your mom? At this, Earl Nancy suddenly stopped crying, his voice turning flat. She ran off with another man. She doesn't want me anymore. The warm glow of the streetlights highlighted his stubborn face. Caught between crying and not crying, he lowered his gaze to the ground. There was still a scratch on his nose, making him look like a pitiful little puppy. As I watched him, a pang of sympathy hit me. It's getting late. Aren't you going home for dinner? Earl Nancy shook his head. My dad drinks all the time. He doesn't care about me. As he said this, he stood up, the chilly autumn wind rustling around him. He pulled his hoodie over his head, and shoved his hands into his pockets. Forget it, I'll just go to the convenience store, and buy some instant noodles. I felt a bit bad for him. Wait, he turned around and looked at me. How about you come to my place for dinner? Earl Nancy paused, his eyes twinkling as he smiled, revealing dimples. Really? I nodded. Yeah, to be honest, bringing a stranger home for dinner made me a little nervous, especially since this stranger happened to be the notorious school bully. What if he sold me out on the way? Luckily, my worries were unfounded. Soon enough, I brought Earl Nancy back to my house. After knocking, my mom came to the door. Janice Obadiah, why are you so late? When she opened the door and saw Earl Nancy standing beside me, she froze. I quickly recited the excuse I had prepared. Mom, this is my desk mate. His parents aren't home today, so he wanted to have dinner with us. Earl Nancy nodded eagerly, smiling and greeting my mom. Hi, Auntie. I'm Earl Nancy. I glanced at him. What's with this? Did he come here to steal my mom or what? My mom was momentarily surprised, then smiled warmly. Earl Nancy. Hey. Welcome. Welcome. My mom really is a warm-hearted person. As I watched piece after piece of sweet and sour ribs being passed to Earl Nancy's bowl, I suddenly regretted bringing him home. I hurriedly grabbed some ribs and said, "Oh, Mom, he doesn't eat much. Don't give him too many." But Earl Nancy devoured everything in his bowl, and even looked up seriously to say, "No way, I've got a big appetite. Don't worry, I can finish it." I stared at him, speechless. Lesson learned. Don't bring strangers home for dinner. Otherwise, there'll be nothing left for your family dog. Watching Earl Nancy ladle rice into his bowl, I started to worry about our dog. Earl Nancy, slow down. If you keep eating, our dog won't have any food left. He paused, giving me a pitiful look. But I'm still a bit hungry. My mom jumped to defend him. He's still growing. Let him eat. It's not like it's your rice. I was stunned into silence. Fine, I get it. He really is here to steal my mom. Oddly enough, my mom and Earl Nancy got along really well. Before he left, he even hugged my mom and said sweetly, "Bye, Auntie." My mom waved him off. "Come by any time." As I sat there stroking my hungry dog, I thought, today it's the dog going hungry, but tomorrow it might be me. Please don't come back. Really, don't. If you come again, my mom won't want me anymore. Earl Nancy, that little rascal, is too much. I treat him kindly, and he steals my mom. After he left, I couldn't help but ask my mom, "Mom, why are you nicer to Earl Nancy than to me?" My mom shook her head and sighed. "Just the other day, I saw him eating instant noodles outside the convenience store for several days in a row. I don't know what his parents are up to, not even making him meals. Poor kid." I froze, suddenly feeling a little sorry for him. The next morning on my way to school, I ran into Earl Nancy again. He was pushing his bike and buying breakfast at a food stall. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. He grabbed his breakfast and pedaled over immediately. Earl Nancy lifted a hot roasted sweet potato from his bike basket and tossed it to me with a smile. "Hey, want some?" I caught it just in time and hadn't even thanked him before he sped off on his bike, disappearing into the distance. I took a bite of the roasted sweet potato. It was warm and sweet. I couldn't help but smile. Earl Nancy, that kid, actually knew how to return a favor. What was strange, though, was that after this, whenever I ran into him, he would avoid me, running off as fast as he could at the sight of me. A few days later, I overheard some classmates gossiping. "Hey, did you hear? The school bully said from now on, no one can mess with Janice Obadiah from class 3. Anyone who dares to bully her is picking a fight with him." I was taken aback. Was this kid just trying to be awkward? The classmates sitting around me started teasing. Janice, what's going on between you and the school bully?" I frowned and ignored them. A joke or two would have been fine, but my classmates kept poking fun at me about it. Finally, I'd had enough. The next time I ran into Earl, I rushed over to chase him down. He must be known his words were causing me trouble because the moment I grabbed him, he struggled hard to get away. Eventually, he stopped struggling, biting his lip and looking flustered. Sorry, I was just trying to protect you. I didn't expect it would cause you more trouble." He glanced at me, his brows furrowed. "Do you hate me? Please don't hate me, okay, please." His voice got smaller and smaller. Something felt off. When I looked up, I saw his eyes were brimming with tears. I panicked and let go of him immediately. "Hey, what are you crying for? It's just an explanation." Earl nodded vigorously and quickly wiped his tears with his sleeve. When he saw the wet stains on his uniform, he frowned in disgust. So embarrassing. He sniffled and pulled himself together. "Anyway, I'll fix it. Don't worry." Seeing him like this, I couldn't help but laugh. I reached out and patted his head. "All right, I'll be waiting." Earl looked up at my hand on his head, clearly annoyed, his voice a bit whiny. Don't pat my head. I'm not a dog." But I never expected the way Earl would handle it. The next day, a new rumor spread. "Hey, did you hear? Earl Nancy said Janice Obadiah is his cousin, so everyone should stop spreading gossip." As I walked into class munching on a bun, I was dumbfounded. What? He's my brother now. How did Earl Nancy have the nerve to say that? During the break, I went to the snack shop to buy some treats. As I queued up to pay, I found myself standing behind Earl. One of my annoying male classmates happened to pass by. You, Janice, you and your brother aren't even greeting each other. Maybe this cousin thing was all made up. Hey. Earl turned around, and when he saw me, he froze. He gave me a look. With a deep frown, I reluctantly muttered, "Bro." Earl's eyes lit up instantly, his lips curling into a satisfied smile, so wide it almost reached the sky. Even I, as clueless as I am, could tell he was secretly enjoying this. As soon as we stepped out of the shop, I knocked him on the forehead. He winced. "Oh. Who told you to go around saying you're my brother?" He scratched his head, his expression sincere. "Sorry, I was thinking about beating up the people spreading rumors, but that would have taken too long, so I came up with this instead." Typical school bully logic. There was still some time before the next class, and I wanted to chat with him, but he hurriedly said he had something to do. I grabbed his sleeve and asked, "You, the school bully, don't study, don't do homework. What could you possibly have to do?" He turned to look at me, gave a helpless smile, and told the truth. "If I spend too much time with you, I'm afraid I'll just bring you more trouble." With that, he quickly turned and walked away, his school jacket billowing in the cold wind. His figure looked so lonely. Come to think of it, most school bullies are surrounded by a gang of lackeys, but he was always alone, watching his back. My nose stung. What a pitiful little guy, going without food and without friends. But his personality was pretty sweet. Why didn't anyone hang out with him? It was strange. I didn't think he was a bad guy. And later, when I saw him, I always greeted him. Yet every time he saw me, he would pretend not to notice and run off at lightning speed. One weekend, my mom suddenly asked me, "Janice, why don't you bring that friend over for dinner anymore? I bumped into him at the convenience store yesterday, and he said hello." Poor kid, he looks even skinnier. I paused and told my mom the truth. "Mom, he's actually the school bully." My mom blinked. "Well, he doesn't seem like a bad kid to me. Anyway, you shouldn't judge someone based on what others say. If you trust him, feel free to bring him over for dinner more often." Later, I found out why Earl was labeled the school bully. In middle school, he had taken on 3 guys at once, and he almost dislocated someone's arm. I was shocked when I heard that. One day at lunch, Earl walked over to me in the cafeteria, something that had never happened before. I instinctively took a step back and asked nervously, "I heard you nearly dislocated someone's arm once." He nodded casually. "Yeah, so." I was dumbstruck, fighting the urge to run. He continued, "I was just defending myself. Those guys wanted to gang up on me, so I fought back. And well, I accidentally went a bit overboard." I stood there, frozen. Okay, maybe it was self-defense, but still it sounded kind of scary. Seeing me stunned, he gave a bitter smile. "I thought we were friends by now. Guess I was wrong. It's fine. Everyone's afraid of me anyway. I'm used to it." He bit his lip, trying to act tough. With that, he turned and walked away. After that, I avoided Earl for a few days. He didn't say anything, just kept his distance from me. But whenever we crossed paths, he'd give me this longing look, like he was waiting for something. One day, I found Earl eating lunch alone in a corner of the cafeteria. I finally gathered the courage to sit down in front of him. He looked up at me, raising an eyebrow. You're not afraid of me anymore." I took a deep breath, mustering my courage. "You're my brother, right? What's there to be afraid of?" He froze for a moment, then scratched his head with an awkward smile, a blush creeping up his cheeks. I lowered my head and started eating. The school cafeteria food was awful. After 2 bites, I could barely eat anymore. All, however, was devouring his food. I stared at him, pointing at my plate. "Do you actually think this stuff tastes good?" He paused, cheeks full, and muttered through his food, "Well, it's better than instant noodles." Then he sighed, grumbling to himself, "Seriously, those instant noodle companies should make more flavors. I'm so tired of the ones they sell at the convenience store." Hearing this made my heart sink, so I pushed my plate toward him. I hate these veggies anyway." "You can have them." He frowned, noticing something. You hate spinach, carrots, and pumpkin. What did you grow up eating, Janice? I felt a bit embarrassed and quietly poked at the chicken leg left in my bowl. I had given him all my veggies, but I kept the chicken leg for myself. After all, the chicken leg was the only thing worth eating in the cafeteria. I couldn't bear to give it up. Earl didn't say anything, accepting my offer, but then he suddenly picked up his own chicken leg and placed it in my bowl. He smiled. Here, take this. I was taken aback. Don't you like chicken? Of course I do, but I'm giving it to you. I looked up, and Earl was resting his chin on his hand, watching me with a smile. His gaze, filled with warmth and amusement, made my heart skip a beat. Day by day, Earl Nancy continued to visibly lose weight. I couldn't stand it anymore. One day at lunch, I told him, Earl Nancy, come home with me tonight for dinner. He was in the middle of eating. Hearing my words, he froze. After a long pause, he shook his head. No, it's okay. I blinked, then tried another approach. You know you won't grow taller if you don't eat. How tall are you now? 5'7". Think you'll reach 6 feet. Why does it matter if I reach 6 feet? Most girls like tall guys. He glanced at me, fell silent for a moment, and then asked softly, Do you like tall guys too? I thought for a moment and nodded. Yeah. He hesitated for a while, then nodded in agreement. Okay, I'll come. So after school, I brought him home. After dinner, he insisted on washing the dishes. Since that chore was taken care of, my mom sat down next to me too, watched TV. Coincidentally, there was a wedding scene playing in a drama. As she cracked open some sunflower seeds, my mom started chatting. Janice, when you look for a partner, find someone like Earl Nancy. Hardworking. Right after she said that, a loud crash came from the kitchen. I rushed over to find Earl, face flushed, standing there helplessly staring at the shattered pieces on the floor. Seeing me, he panicked and bent down to pick up the shards. I quickly stopped him. Don't touch that. But I was too late. When I looked again, there was blood on Earl's hand. As I searched for a bandage, I scolded him. How could you be so careless? He followed behind me, speaking softly. I got nervous when I heard what your mom said. And then well, wait, what did my mom say? When I remembered, my face turned red. Once I found the bandage, I started treating his wound. After I finished, I looked up to find Earl grinning ear to ear, looking ridiculously happy. I frowned. This guy must be lost it. How could he be so cheerful after getting hurt? What are you smiling about? He blinked and toned down his smile a bit. Nothing. It just seems like you care about me. Of course I do. What's wrong with that? He stared at me, dead serious. Yeah, I'm really happy about that. I froze, feeling my face heat up again. Quickly, I grabbed a glass of cold water to calm myself down. Earl watched me quietly. Janice, I really like you. PFFFT. I spat out my water, my face even redder. Earl paused, then finished his sentence. Your mom's cooking. I glared at him, forcing a smile. Earl Nancy, if you can't phrase it properly, don't even try. He looked hurt. Hey, you're the one who cut me off. No, you. He put a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. Okay, it's my fault. I blinked. Whoa, he's obedient. In November, the school held a sports competition. Earl Nancy, being an athlete, was seriously talented. When I heard he'd be competing in the sprint race, I told him I'd come to cheer him on. He smiled at me. Better not. I was taken aback. What do you mean? He smirked, his eyes curving into crescent moons. I'm afraid if I see you, I'll forget to run straight. I chuckled lightly. On the day of the race, I still went to watch. Just as everyone said, Earl was incredible. He won easily, leaving the second place runner far behind. When he crossed the finish line, he looked around, a little lost. I waved to him. Over here. I tossed him a bottle of water, and Earl caught it effortlessly. He twisted off the cap and took a long drink. After a few sips, he poured the rest over his head. His hair, drenched, clung to his face as he shook his head and stood there, panting, smiling at me. The whole time, I smiled back, unable to resist. The autumn wind picked up, the flags fluttering in the breeze. In that moment, I couldn't tell if it was the wind, or the flags that were moving. After school, Earl told me the teacher had asked him to stay behind for something and that I should head home. I nodded and left on my own. As I passed the alley where I first met Earl, everything went dark. Someone had grabbed me by the neck and was dragging me away. Panic rose within me. For a few seconds, everything was eerily silent. Then, without any warning, the people holding me started kicking and punching me. One blow to my leg, another to my stomach. It hurt so much. I bit my lip and started crying in fear. I don't know how long it took, but eventually, they stopped. One of them kicked me. Janice Obadiah. Right. Tell Earl Nancy to tone it down, and stop showing off all the time. The alley suddenly fell silent. Clink. The sound of a bike hitting the ground. Then, I heard sounds of fighting and screams around me. If you have a problem, come at me. Bullying a girl doesn't make you a man. Dazed and confused, I finally snapped back to my senses. It was Earl Nancy. Footsteps approached me, and suddenly, the bag over my head was yanked off. I opened my eyes, and there was Earl Nancy squatting in front of me, panic all over his face. The group of thugs ran off in a hurry. Earl Nancy looked at me, his hand trembling as he wiped the tears from my face. His legs gave way, and he fell to his knees. I'm sorry, it's all my fault. It's all my fault. His voice grew quieter, and he hugged me, sobbing softly. I patted his head. It's okay, it doesn't hurt, I'm fine. But he didn't respond, just kept apologizing. I smiled wryly. What's up with you? Crying harder than I am. I was still curious and asked him, who were those people? Earl Nancy lowered his head, avoiding my gaze. Second place in today's sprint race, trailing me by a long way. I was stunned. So that's what it was. But after this, I didn't want to distance myself from him. Instead, I trusted him even more. However, Earl Nancy didn't seem quite right emotionally. The next day after school, I waited for him outside his classroom, so we could walk home together. When I saw him, I smiled, but he looked at me with a cold face. On the way home, I tried to liven up the mood by talking about funny things that happened in class, but he still looked deeply troubled. As we neared his house, he suddenly turned to me. Earl Nancy took a deep breath and spoke. Maybe we should stop hanging out. He looked regretful and guilty. I'm always causing you trouble. I was stunned. Sure enough, he was still hung up on what happened last night. I playfully hit him. Hey, I got bullied because of you, and instead of protecting me, you're thinking of running away. He shook his head quickly. That's not what I meant. Then from now on, you're in charge of walking me home. No more excuses. It's settled. I turned and walked away. Behind me, Earl Nancy shook his head and muttered, can't do anything about you? These days, Earl Nancy went out of town for a competition and said he'd be back on Monday. At 10 on Sunday night, there was a sudden knock on my door. I opened it, and there he was, Earl Nancy. He looked at me with joy, holding a big bag of snacks. His face was flushed, and he was panting like he had run all the way here. He looked at me with the biggest grin. Janice Obadiah, I got first place in the competition. I smiled. Congrats. I invited him in to sit down. No sooner had he taken a sip of water than he excitedly continued, and guess what? I got signed by University A. As long as I do decently on my college entrance exams, I'll get in. I froze. University A is one of the top schools in the country, the kind I could never get into, no matter how hard I studied. I forced a smile to congratulate him, but inside, I was worried. I'd never make it into University A. Earl Nancy saw the worried look on my face, and his smile faded. What's wrong? Are you not happy? I shook my head. No. I was just thinking about how hard I'll have to work to get into University A. It's okay, even if you don't make it, we can still go to schools near each other. After the college entrance exams, I applied to a school only an hour away from University A. As the start of school approached, I felt increasingly uneasy. I kept feeling like I was falling behind, that Earl Nancy was getting farther and farther away. It was like he was speeding down the track, faster and faster, and I could only watch his back, never able to catch up. So, before school started, I confessed to Earl Nancy while we were taking a walk. He was tilting his head back, leisurely sipping a drink. I looked up at him and said, Earl Nancy, want to be together? He froze and glanced at me. His eyes flickered. The next moment, he lowered his head, and his tone turned serious. Wouldn't it be better to stay as we are? My heart sank, and I nodded lightly, agreeing with him. In the dim light, I couldn't see his expression. I stared blankly at the stars above and didn't say another word. That night, under my covers, I couldn't hold back my tears. It was the first time I cried as shamefully as Earl Nancy. I wondered if I had misread the situation. Maybe Earl Nancy never liked me at all. After we started college, Earl Nancy contacted me less and less. Sometimes, I'd message him in the morning, and he wouldn't reply until evening. I couldn't help but think back to when he brushed off my confession. Now, he was growing more distant. Could he be busy wagging his tail for someone else? The thought pained me, so I stopped reaching out for a few days. Thankfully, it turned out he wasn't. After military training ended, Earl Nancy finally messaged me. Are you free? I'll come see you in a few days. I was happy but still a little sulky. Busy guy doesn't even have time to reply to messages, but he's got time to come see me. He quickly sent a voice message. I played it, and he dragged his voice, sounding playful and sweet. I'm sorry. Just those 3 words, and I couldn't help but forgive him. How about Sunday afternoon? Okay, he replied instantly, even sending a sticker of a dog wagging its tail. I looked at the sticker and couldn't help but laugh. It's just like you. He sent another voice message, sounding exasperated. Whatever you say. On Sunday, he came to visit me. The moment he saw me, he reached out to touch my face, but then hesitated and pulled back. He smiled and said, "You've gotten tanned." I got nervous. No way, I'm wearing makeup. Is it that obvious? Yeah, I punched him lightly. Your emotional intelligence is really low. I took him for a walk around campus. Time flew by, and soon, the sun was setting. It was time for him to leave. Before he left, he told me, "Oh, by the way, I sent you some money. Buy yourself something nice." I opened my phone and saw he'd transferred me $1,000. I got anxious. Where did you get this money? His eyes darted away, and he stammered, prize money from the competition." I frowned. He was never good at lying. I dragged out my words. "Tell the truth." He lowered his head. I earned it." "How did you earn it?" He scratched his head. "How else? Just some manual work." I got worried. Manual labor is tough on the body. Focus on your training. It's not worth it to hurt yourself over a little extra cash. He nodded obediently. All right, I'll listen to you." As I spoke, I opened my phone, intending to transfer the money back to him, but he stopped me. "It's for you. Keep it. I don't need money." "Why are you giving it to me?" He chuckled. "I just want to give it to you. I just want to see you happy." I used that money to buy him some snacks and a dog-themed pajama set, which I sent to his school. Later, Earl Nancy would occasionally visit me. He brought me mooncakes during the Mid-Autumn Festival, zongzo during the Dragon Boat Festival, but never flowers on any romantic holidays. On Valentine's Day, I used the excuse of wanting to visit him. I even secretly brought a bouquet of flowers with me. That night, I waited for him outside his dorm, but he didn't show up for a long time. In the end, he stood me up. He didn't even give a proper reason, just a simple, "Something came up," brushing me off. That night, I waited in the cold wind until dawn. In the end, I threw the flowers into the trash. No matter how much I liked him, I couldn't keep clinging to him like that. After that, I rarely contacted him, but he messaged me often. He'd send updates about his day, just like how a boyfriend would text his girlfriend. One day, I'd had enough. I sent him a voice message. "Earl Nancy, don't you have any sense of boundaries? We're friends, not a couple." He typed for a long time. Finally, his response came. Just 2 short words. "Sorry." Seeing that, my heart suddenly felt empty. After that, we barely kept in touch. I heard that Earl Nancy was really talented, dedicated in his training, and had won quite a few awards. But no matter how brilliant he became, it had nothing to do with me anymore. Time flew by, and soon I was a sophomore. This semester's workload was particularly heavy. One evening, I was on the field with a few classmates filming a group project. During the shoot, I played the female lead. walking side by side with the male lead across the field. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw Earl Nancy. Turns out, it wasn't my imagination. Earl Nancy was walking briskly, carrying a bunch of stuff, looking very pleased with himself. What's he doing here? While acting, I kept glancing at him from time to time. Suddenly, Earl Nancy, walking quickly across the field, locked eyes with me. His smile froze as he glanced at the boy beside me. After standing there for a while, he turned and walked away without looking back. He must have misunderstood. I wanted to explain, but the filming wasn't finished, so I couldn't get away. An hour later, we finally wrapped up filming. I checked my phone and saw a message from Earl Nancy. Janice Obadiah, I came to see you. I have some incredible news. What news? I grew curious and called him back. The phone rang for a long time before he finally picked up. Hello. As soon as he spoke, his voice was hoarse, and he sounded a bit nasally. I was taken aback, frowning, and cautiously asked, "Are you crying?" Earl Nancy was silent for a moment, then said, What are you crying about?" He stayed silent, not saying a word. After a long while, he finally said, "What do you think?" I was dumbfounded. Oh, he must be misunderstood my relationship with the male lead. But why was he jealous all of a sudden after ignoring me for so long? Thinking that, I deliberately didn't explain, and changed the subject. "What's the good news you wanted to tell me?" He sniffled. "Nothing much. Just that I won the competition, and I wanted to share half the prize money with you. I've already transferred it to you. I hope you're happy." With that, he hung up. I was stunned. That idiot. What was he saying? I pulled down the message thread and saw, Earl Nancy has transferred 25,000 Chinese yuan to you. I was even more confused. Where did he get that much money? I called him again, and thankfully, he didn't hang up in a huff. "Where are you?" "I'm on the subway, heading back to school." "Wait for me, I'm coming to your school." When I arrived outside Earl Nancy's dorm, I called him again. "I'm here, come out." He mumbled, "I don't want to." "Come out." His voice sounded a little hoarse over the phone. "I just showered. Don't feel like coming down. Just tell me over the phone." I was getting impatient. "You've got 5 minutes. Come down." He sighed on the other end and hung up. 5 minutes later, as promised, he came down. It looked like he really had showered. He was wearing the dog-themed pajamas I had bought for him, with the hood pulled up tightly around him. He looked so cute that I couldn't help but pinch the little dog ears on his hood. But he took a step back. "Don't touch me." The moment he spoke, his tearful voice betrayed him. The streetlight was too dim for me to see his face clearly. So, I turned on the flashlight on my phone, and shined it on him. When I saw his face, I was startled. His eyes were swollen and red, with bloodshot streaks. But I didn't feel sorry for him at all. Who told him to keep stringing me along? "Whoa, you've been crying," I said indifferently. He sniffled, his nose turning red, tears welling up again. I quickly got serious. "Stop crying. People are walking by. It's embarrassing." He wiped his tears with his sleeve, looking at me with a pitiful expression. "You're leaving me for someone else too. You don't want me anymore either." I felt like crying, and laughing at the same time. In the end, he made me smile. That's when he completely broke down, tears streaming down his face. "You're still laughing." I started to explain. "That wasn't my boyfriend. We were just acting. It was for a group project." He paused, wiping his nose. "Really?" I pulled out my phone, and showed him a picture of the male lead with his girlfriend. "Now do you believe me?" Earl Nancy immediately stopped crying. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" "Made me look stupid." I laughed. "Oh, so you know what embarrassment feels like. By the way, if you hadn't reacted like this, I wouldn't have known you cared so much about me." Crying like that. His eyes darted away, neither admitting nor denying it. Seeing him stay silent, I felt a little disappointed. I shifted the conversation. "Where did you get so much money?" "This time it's really prize money." He took out his phone, and showed me pictures of the trophy, grinning as he asked, "Aren't I amazing?" Looking closely, it was true, a national competition, no less. "You're the best." Even though he was still avoiding the topic, I had decided to get to the bottom of it tonight. "So," I said, "go change clothes." Let's go for a walk. He nodded. Unluckily, it started drizzling. When Earl Nancy came back down, he was holding 2 umbrellas. We strolled through the cold, empty streets, side by side. There weren't many people around, so I started messing around. I sneaked up behind him, and slipped my cold hands into the back of his neck. He yelped from the cold and grabbed my mischievous hands, stuffing them into his pocket. Still unsatisfied, I grabbed his hand instead. Lend me your hand to warm up. Okay. He froze for a moment, then nodded, his face turning red. I was so happy I started rambling nonsense. The puppy's paws are so warm. Well, my abs are probably even warmer, Earl Nancy says with a frown, clearly not amused. Who's the puppy? I poke his nose, laughing. You, of course. Earl Nancy rolls his eyes but then can't help but smile. It is you. I laugh even harder. I slide my hands under his sweater. Hey, let me warm my hands on those abs. You don't mind, do you? He immediately grabs my hands, stopping me from moving around. Leaning close to my ear, he whispers, be good, stop messing around. My heart starts racing. Looking up, I see the streetlight casting a golden glow on his knit hat. It catches the drizzle, making the scene feel soft and intimate. With the mood set like this, it would be such a waste not to do something. I stop walking, look up at him, pinch his cheek, and smile. Earl Nancy, let's be together. He freezes, his face turning even redder. But, to my surprise, he shakes his head. Cold raindrops fall on my face as my smile falters. Why? He shakes his head again and says, I want to become someone you can truly rely on, like a big, dependable dog. So, could you wait a little longer for me? Earl Nancy moves closer, gently hugging me and stroking my head. But I've already waited so long. I don't want to wait anymore. I push him away in frustration, my voice breaking. I'm not waiting for you. I've waited long enough. If you don't say yes soon, I'm going to find someone else. He grabs my hand, suddenly panicked. No, you can't. He pulls me into a tight embrace, like he's afraid of losing something. Why not? I start, but before I can finish, his lips are on mine, silencing me. I freeze. Earl Nancy kisses me with his eyes closed, tears streaming down his face. I stand there in the quiet night, eyes open, watching him cry as he kisses me. It feels like forever before he finally lets go. His expression changes, wiping away the tears. His face hardens again, like today, walking around the track shoulder to shoulder with someone else. That's not okay. I snap back, frustrated. You don't want to be with me, but you don't want me with anyone else either. What are you even thinking? He stays silent for a while, his eyes distant. Then, with a sigh, he speaks softly. Janice Obadiah, I don't have a proper family. I don't have endless money or any of the things you deserve. If I accepted your confession, it would be irresponsible of me. He gazes at me, cupping my face gently. My future is uncertain. If I don't achieve something, I'll be stuck in hardship for the rest of my life. I can handle that, but I can't drag you into that kind of life. I sigh, feeling the weight of his words. All right, if you do find someone you truly love, one day I'll wish you the best. As he says this, his eyes darken, and he looks away. Liar. He's lying. I grit my teeth, resisting the urge to slap him. You're talking nonsense. The person I love is you. Only you. With that, I stand on my tiptoes and kiss him. He's stunned, completely caught off guard. After I pull away, I bite his lip gently. I don't care. You kissed me first, didn't you? Now that you've kissed me, you're responsible for me. No negotiations. From this moment on, you're officially my boyfriend, approved and certified. Earl Nancy is completely baffled by my sudden declaration. After a long pause, he lets out a helpless laugh. You. Seeing he's not spouting any more nonsense, I finally relax. He takes my hand gently. So, are you heading back to campus tonight? Do you want me to? He shakes his head. So that night, we stayed at a hotel. 1 room, 1 bed. Before sleeping, something crosses my mind. Hey, aren't you forgetting something? What? A proper confession. A clear, complete confession. He smiles, brushing my hair softly. I like you. I really, really like you. That night, he just held me as we slept. Nothing more. The next day, Earl Nancy set up a dinner, saying he wanted to introduce me to his dorm mates. I frowned. This feels like you're introducing me to your parents or something. Why am I so nervous? At the dinner, one of his friends teased, Earl Nancy, why are we suddenly meeting your girlfriend? Have you been dating for 2 years and are now ready to get married? Wait, 2 years. I panicked. Who's been dating him for 2 years? Could Earl Nancy have been seeing someone else behind my back? I cautiously asked, has Earl Nancy mentioned my name to you guys before? Yeah, sure, I remember him mentioning you. I sighed in relief. What did he say? Oh, this guy's something else. I remember him showing off new clothes once, bragging about how his wife bought him a puppy-themed pajama set. He'd always flaunt his relationship in front of us single guys. So unfair. I burst into laughter, glancing over at Earl Nancy. He scratched his head, smiling sheepishly. I smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace. It turns out I had already been playing this role in his life. Even back then, time flew by after that. Before I knew it, I had graduated and started interning at a news outlet. Earl Nancy continued his daily training, eventually earning a spot to compete in the Olympics after rigorous selection. A few days later, my supervisor told me we were heading to the Olympics for live interviews. I was beyond excited, and punched him playfully. Earl Nancy, I'm going to watch you compete in person. He gave a wry smile. No way, I'm already nervous enough. If you come, I'll be even more anxious. The competition day came quickly. As the gun went off, Earl Nancy sprinted, leaping over each obstacle with ease. In the first half of the race, he led the pack, but as time went on, another runner closed in on him. Finally, they crossed the finish line together. Earl Nancy missed first place by just 0.1 seconds. When the results came in, he cried so hard. Everyone tried to comfort him, saying that his performance was already incredible. I saw him standing on the podium, draped in the national flag, tears streaming down his face. Watching him, I couldn't help but cry too. In that moment, I was proud of him. After coming off the track, Earl Nancy's first interview was with me. The moment he saw me, his tears started welling up again. I lightly punched him and laughed. Stop crying. You're embarrassing yourself. He wiped his eyes and nodded. Okay. After he pulled himself together, I started the interview. Are you satisfied with the result? He shook his head. No, not really. How are you feeling now? Miserable, he muttered. Who has had the biggest impact on you throughout this journey? Earl Nancy wiped his eyes again, then looked up at me. My wife. She's been so good to me, really good. I wanted to win a gold medal for her, but I couldn't. I didn't run fast enough. His voice trembled, and he started wiping his eyes again, sounding like a child. I only got a silver medal. It's so embarrassing. I couldn't help but laugh. Then, out of nowhere, he pulled out a ring. Babe, even though it's just a silver medal, you wouldn't mind, right? He pushed the ring and the medal into my hands. I froze, completely stunned. Thankfully, the interview had already been cut off by then, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So, babe, will you marry me? I was still in shock, but Earl Nancy was growing impatient. My wife already called you. You wouldn't refuse, would you? Janice Obadiah, say something. He was so anxious, stamping his feet. His little whimpering tone was adorable. I finally snapped out of it and gently patted his head. All right, I agree. He hurriedly slipped the ring onto my finger. Later, Earl Nancy posted something on social media. It was a picture of a medal next to a ring. The caption was a long heartfelt message. From the first time she took me home for dinner, I felt how do I say this? Like a puppy who found its owner. Then, she became my first friend. She stayed with me, encouraged me, and even confessed her feelings to me. During the toughest years of my life, she was the warmest light. But back then, I had nothing. Until I made something of myself, I didn't dare accept her confession. And today, it seems like I've finally made it. I used to wonder how I could repay her, through money, through honor, but now, I realize, the best way is with the rest of my life. This story has concluded. Feel free to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest content. Tons of novels are updated daily.